I thank the House. Questions without notice, and I will give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's promise to the families of Longford in the electorate of Lyons that, and I quote, "We've looked at measures that make a real permanent difference to cost of living. Our Powering Australia plan will reduce household power prices by $275, a promise repeated at least 15 times. Will the Prime Minister apologise to Australians he's misled?"
Order. Order. Members on my right. I'll give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question. And indeed, in Longman, in electorates right around Australia, people are struggling with high power bills. And they're higher because of the failure of those opposite over 10 long years to implement.
Members on my left. Members on my left. The member for Latrobe.
To implement a policy. We stand by our plan to put more renewables in the system, which will drive down power prices. And we note that those opposite voted against lower power prices today. They voted against it again and again and again and again and again. They voted against it consistently because one of their final acts in government was actually to hide the power price increases that were coming in July 1. They didn't just hide it by not telling people, they hid it by changing through a regulation, going to the Governor-General in the dying days of a dying government, the dying days of a dying government. They went to the GG and changed the rules so that Australians would not know when they voted on May 21 that there were already baked-in increases in power prices coming on July 1.
We'll just take a break. The Manager of the Opposition Business.
The point of order is on relevance. The people of Longford don't care about their excuses. They want to know if they're going to get the promised power price cut of $275.
Resume your seat. Prime Minister is in order. He was talking about the commitment made. I call the Prime Minister.
And whether it was in Tasmania or whether it was in Queensland or whether in South Australia or whether in Western Australia, whether it was in the city or a regional town, we had the same message. And that message was backed by, this morning, an alphabet soup of business leaders. These are the groups that called upon the coalition to back the legislation that went through the House of Reps earlier today. AICD, ACSI, IGCC, ACF, BCA, AIG, ACCI, ACSI, RIAA, GIA, the Minerals Council of Australia, the Minerals Council of Australia,
members on my left
calling
and
upon
right.
them to vote for certainty.
For Home Affairs.
That's what business wants, because if business, I'll give you the big tip, if business has certainty, they can invest, and it's investment in cheaper, cleaner energy that will drive down power prices.
Order. Order. Give the call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How will the government's climate legislation help to put the climate wars behind us after a decade of climate denial and inaction?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Canberra for her question. On May 21, the Australian people voted for change. They voted to end the division, they voted to end the inaction and finally put the climate wars behind us. They have backed our Powering Australia plan. They gave us a mandate for the 43% target, and today we'll deliver on the first step of enshrining this target in law, giving our country the certainty that we need to shape the future. On the first day that I became Labor leader, I said that Australians had conflict fatigue. And on climate, rather than rally the same troops to dig a deeper trench in the same spot, I wanted us to find new allies. And new allies we have found. New allies we have found. This is what Jennifer Westacott, the CEO of the Business Council of Australia, has said. This legislation has brought Australia a step closer to ending the climate wars that have put a handbrake on progress and become a serious economic barrier. We welcome this legislation and the adoption of key elements of the Business Council's plan to reach net zero emissions. 43% is a sensible, achievable target which can be delivered alongside new industries and better jobs with coordinated action. We thank the government for working with business to deliver a workable plan, reduce emissions and strengthen Australia's economic future. Remember when the Liberal Party used to have a relationship with business? Remember that? But what we saw today was just them isolated and alone, stuck in the same old trench, fighting a fight that has passed them by themselves with their arms crossed, just saying no, no, no. The coalition of yesterday, the no-alition of today. Just saying no, saying no to absolutely everything.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? I call the manager.
Mr Speaker, under the rulings you've made, it is not in order for the Prime Minister to engage in an unstructured sledging of this side of the House, which is what he's doing.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. I call the Prime Minister.
It's completely structured sledging.
Order. Members on my right. The Prime Minister is addressing the question. He's in order. Call the Prime Minister.
If he's offended by that, he should see what the business community is saying about them in private. He should have a chat. Have a chat to the National Farmers Federation or the Australian Industry Group about manufacturing or the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry or the Business Council of Australia about how irrelevant they have become. How irrelevant they have become. Now, I haven't always been close on all issues to those on the crossbenches, but I tell you what, they were prepared to engage constructively and at least behave with a bit more maturity than those who jokingly call themselves the alternative.
The Prime Minister's time has expired. I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Small Business. Can the Minister confirm that small businesses will see a $275 reduction in their energy bills by 2025?
Give the call to the Minister for Housing, Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Is it different?
I thank the member for her question, and we all know, as I said in this place last week, that small businesses are facing challenges, and one of them is rising electricity prices because, of course, you didn't have the guts to tell them prior to the election that you were going to put up their electricity prices.
Order.
The former minister over here actually deliberately hid it, made a deliberate decision not to tell small businesses that their power prices were going to increase because of your government's inaction over the last decade.
The Minister will resume her seat and remind her to direct, and I'll remind her to direct comments through the chair. And order. I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
A point of order, Mr Speaker, on relevance. It was a very narrow question. It specifically asked, will small business see a $275 reduction in their energy bills?
I thank the Deputy Leader of the
Opposition. A very narrow question.
To resume her seat. The Minister is entitled to a preamble to the question. She's done that. I'll ask her to draw her to the question. I call the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think I've answered the question. Those opposite are the ones that hid increasing electricity prices from small businesses prior to the election.
I'm giving... I'll call the Deputy Leader and will ask her to state the point of order.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave to table the Labor Party's Powering Australia plan mentioned twice already by the Prime Minister in question time, which specifically refers to $275 a year in relief.
I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. She may resume her seat. Just so that she's clear. Order. Order. Just so that all members are clear, particularly new members, if a document is to be tabled, the minister must refer to that document. She didn't refer that to an answer, so that is not a point of order. I give the call to the member for Macnamara.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How will the government's procurement of the new third-generation monkeypox vaccine protect Australians from the spread of monkeypox?
I give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Macnamara for his question. I know he's been closely engaged with his community about the impact of the global outbreak of monkeypox here in Australia, and he's been closely engaged with me as well. Mr Speaker, it's only 13 weeks since the first case of monkeypox outside of the endemic countries in Africa that have experienced that virus for many years was notified in the UK. And in that time, outside of Africa, more than 25,000 cases have been reported across 76 different countries, countries that have not experienced monkeypox before. More than 6,000 cases have been reported in the US, almost 3,000 in the UK and more than 4,000 here in Spain. Mr Speaker, this is a self-limiting illness that is usually mild to moderate, but over the past week or so we have started to see reports of deaths, both in the endemic African countries, but also 4 deaths in those countries that have not experienced monkeypox before. Since the first case was reported here in Australia on the 19th of May, Mr Speaker, 58 cases have been reported in Australia. And on the day after that first report, on the 20th of May, the Health Department began negotiations with Bavarian Nordic, the company that manufactures the new third-generation vaccine for monkeypox. And since that time, there have been 27 meetings with that company in a very, very competitive global market, a market that's, as you imagine, Mr Speaker, highly constrained. And I'm pleased to announce that we have secured the supply for Australia of 450,000 doses of this new state-of-the-art vaccine, and that will provide not just pre-exposure protection, as a vaccine would be expected to do, but also post-exposure treatment for those people who have contracted the virus. We'll be rolling out that vaccine, Mr Speaker, through state and territory clinics, and I thank the state and territories for their very constructive engagement over recent weeks. And we've also been working over recent weeks to increase clinical awareness and clinical capability to identify, isolate and treat cases as quickly as possible. I want to mention, though, Mr Speaker, because the member for Macnamara has been very focused on this, about community engagement. It's important to say that any person can contract monkeypox, but it has particularly affected across the world gay, bisexual and other men who have sex with men. So we've been closely engaged with organisations like AFAO, the Federation of AIDS Organisations, the clinicians at ASHM, leveraging their networks and the capability that they've built up over the last 4 decades to make sure that communities across Australia have maximum awareness and are able to take up the opportunities that we've been able to secure over the course of this week.
I give the call to the member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Treasurer, ATO data shows the combined income of 5 of the gas industry's biggest companies paid no income tax despite a combined income of $138 billion over the past 7 years. At a time when Australian households and businesses are paying record prices for gas extracted from our reserves and sold back to us by these very companies, do you agree that your government's election promise of multinational tax reform should include a super profits tax?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and to the member for Warringah for her question. As she alluded to in her question, the government's priority is to make sure that multinational corporations pay a fairer share of tax where they make their profits. And what I hope to do in the next day or two is to release the discussion paper, which is the consultation that we committed to when it comes to the implementation of the multinational tax policies that we took to the election. And they are our priority. and they will be hopefully implemented as we describe them in the election campaign. If that consultation process brings to our attention some issues around the implementation of that promise, then obviously then we will take that seriously. In addition to that, there is, as the member is no doubt aware, a big agenda around multinational taxes from the OECD, which the Americans and others have been leading as well. When I was with the Governor of the Reserve Bank at the G20 meetings in Indonesia, one of the topics of conversation with Secretary Janet Yellen and others was about how the world can work together on the two pillars of the OECD agenda, again, to try and make sure that we fix this problem in the global economy and certainly in our economy, where it's too easy for multinational corporations to move their debt or move their profits around the world in a way that sells countries short and makes it harder for us to fund the things that we really care about, healthcare and education and all of those federal government programs that we need to fund in the context of all of our other budget constraints. And so, once again, a bit like the answer to the question from another colleague in the House, I think earlier this week, if not last week, we don't intend to go down the path that you are asking us about, but we do intend to take meaningful action on multinational tax.
Has the Treasurer concluded his answer? Resume your seat. I give the call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What role will the Jobs and Skills Summit play in addressing the challenges facing our economy, and who will be involved?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I congratulate once again the fantastic member for Boothby who joins this parliament for the first time. Now, before the parliament returns for the next sittings of this place on the 1st and 2nd of September, the Albanese Labor government will be hosting a Jobs and Skills Summit here in Canberra. And this is our opportunity to bring Australians together to address the big challenges that we confront in our economy, whether it be labour shortages or skills shortages or stagnant wages. It's our opportunity to work together to create more opportunities for more people in more parts of our country. Now, this side of the House, we recognise that a better future relies on bringing people together. So bringing people together isn't just the aim and the guiding instinct of the Jobs and Skills Summit, it's also the aim and the guiding instinct of this government and of the Australian people that we serve. We want to ensure that there is a good, qualified worker for every business that needs one, and a great, well-paid, secure job for every Australian that wants one. We want a bigger, more productive and better skilled workforce with strong and sustainable wages growth as a defining feature of our national economic success. And that's why the summit will bring together workers and their unions, employers and their peak organisations, community groups, experts and other levels of government as well. And it's why this month there'll be proper consultation with, whether it's by portfolio or in different communities around Australia, as we conduct some genuine consultation in the lead-up to the Jobs and Skills Summit. I'll be doing some of that in Central Queensland next week, because there is a hunger in this country for real talk about our economic challenges. There is an appetite to work together to address them, and there is a willingness in this country right now, at this moment, to see things through the prism of our national economic interest. Now, Mr Speaker, it's time for those opposite to decide whether they want to be part of the solution here or whether they want to continue to be part of the problem. Now, their position on this Jobs Summit has been characteristically confused. Some days—
The Treasurer will resume his seat. I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, it is on relevance. You've given clear guidance as to when ministers may speak about this side of the House. The question was very tight. Jobs and Skills Summit, what role, who will be involved? No reference to this side of the House.
The Manager can resume his seat. The Treasurer is also talking about the end part of the question about addressing problems facing the economy. So I'll ask the Treasurer to return to the question and give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In relation to who will be involved in the summit, on some days those opposite say they want to see the summit cancelled. On other days, they say that they demand an invitation to the Job Summit. On the 11th of July, they said both. On the 11th of July, they said both. It reminds me of what Groucho Marx said. Groucho Marx said he didn't want to be part of an organisation that would have him as a member. The member for Hume doesn't want to be part of a Job Summit that would have him as an attendee. That seems to be the member for Hume's position. Speaker, if we bring to an end this decade of division and dysfunction, conflict and complacency, that's what the summit is all about, and that's what the government's all about as well.
Order. I give the call to the member for Mallee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The CFMEU has given over $10 million to the Labor Party since the last watchdog was abolished. Is the Prime Minister aware of the case of a female operations manager being targeted and verbally abused to the extent that she cried, felt fearful and ill? Why does the Prime Minister keep dismissing this issue when the welfare of 150,000 women working in the construction sector is at stake?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Mallee for her question, and as I've said repeatedly, behaviour such as that, which she has described, is completely unacceptable. And that's why the Fair Work Ombudsman will be responsible, along with Fair Work Australia, for ensuring that industrial relations law is appropriately applied to any union or any employer. Simple as that. But my principle is also that all workers should be subject to the same laws and regulations as others. It's not a radical proposition that we're putting forward here. Our workplace relations system must be based upon fairness, mutual trust, respect and obeying the rule of law. That's our position. Simple as that. And what we have from the ABCC, though, is that there's substantial commentary about how it was supposed to have improved the way that the sector might operate. We'd expect if, while the period the ABCC was the regulator, for there to be improvements in labour productivity in the construction sector. You would expect that to be the case. But if you look at the facts, in 2017-18, productivity was down by 2.4%. In 2018-19, it was down by 2.6%. In 2019-20, it was down by 2.6% also. So the ABCC is supposed to be improving the way that the sector operates, and yet we have labour productivity going down year after year after year. And you would expect also the issue of construction costs to be there. The construction costs of the last 5 years in the heavy and civil engineering sector have risen by up to 20%. And during that time, of course, if you look at the total expenditure on the ABCC, their budget, since it was established from 2016 up to this year, their total budget is some $233 million. $233 million. This year alone, some $34 million. Some $34 million. And during that period, the ABCC boss, indeed Nigel Hadgkiss, had to resign himself in 2017 because he was caught breaching the Fair Work Act himself. Breaching the Fair Work Act himself. And so we take a very clear view, which is behaviour is unacceptable, full stop, of either employees or employers. All workers, bad behaviour is unacceptable. All workers should be subject to the same laws and regulations as others.
Give the call to the member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering for older Australians after a decade of neglect and supporting workers in the aged care sector?
The call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank my friend the member for Dunkley for her question and for her tireless advocacy for older Australians in Dunkley, from Mount Eliza to Frankston to Carrum Downs, communities I know so well because you speak about them so often in the House. And I know she joins with me in our advocacy for getting cracking on aged care reform in the House this week. Mr Speaker, you only get one bill to be the very first bill to go through the new parliament, and that bill for the Albanese Labor government was aged care reform. That's how seriously we take it. And we have now, Mr Speaker, delivered 17 Royal Commission recommendations in just our first 100 days, compared to only 9 Royal Commission recommendations that the Morrison government achieved in 17 months. And we have, therefore, endorsements from the Council of the Ageing, who said that these bills are crucial steps in a reform process that, when fully implemented, will ensure Australians will enjoy the quality aged care system that all Australians deserve. The HSU said that from the first time there is a crack of light at the end of the tunnel. Catholic Health Australia said that the bills really fire the starting gun on reform. The Old Persons Advocacy Network said that the bills represent a watershed moment for older people and their families. And Opal Healthcare said they were delighted to see a new bill that will enshrine mandated standards. And among the most important endorsement of all, the people who care for our older Australians. Mr Speaker, we are joined in the gallery today by Tara, who works in oh, you guys are going to make me cry again, residential aged care in Jimboomba, who cares for Maxine and for Sylvia. Conwell, who joins us from Thursday Island, who works in the only residential aged care facility in Thursday Island. Marina joins us. She supports older Australians in Perth, and she says she wants more transparency and accountability, and that the actions that she saw in the House this week for the very first time gave her hope. Rhiannon is here from South Australia. Staff shortages means that Rhiannon has to get to the older Australians in her care, out of bed, showered and ready for breakfast, all in only 8 minutes. Well, not on our watch, Rhiannon. No longer on our watch. And Catherine works in home care as a community worker. She loves her job. To Tara, Conwell, Marina, Rhiannon and Catherine, on behalf of this House, we say thank you. Our aged care workers deserve a whole lot better, and that's why we're not done yet. Aged Care Employee Day is this Sunday, and that's why on Monday we are sending our submission to the Fair Work Commission to give aged care workers a pay rise. We are going to do what we promised. We are going to do better by you than you ever received under 9 years of neglect of the previous Morrison government. You were our first bill through the House. We are sending our submission on Monday to try and get you a pay rise, and we will continue to deliver those election commitments to keep our promise with the Australian people.
Order. I give the call to the member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Reports in the AFR show the CFMEU-run super fund Cbus, a super fund chaired by the current president of the ALP, spent $11.2 million of members' retirement savings on payments to the Labor Party and unions over the last 5 years. Why is the government, in one of its first acts, moving to hide these payments from hard-working Australians?
Order. I give the call. Order. Members on my right, the Minister for Resources. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I'm asked by the Shadow Treasurer a question about two things. One about things being hid by the Shadow Treasurer, about things being hid, and then a question about integrity from the Shadow Treasurer. Well, sometimes when the Tactics Committee give you a question, you should maybe say maybe someone else should ask that question. Maybe someone else should ask that question. And that's one of the times. Because with regard to hiding information, what this political party that won 77 seats in the House of Representatives did before the election.
The Prime Minister will just take a break. The Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr Speaker, on relevance, the Prime Minister was asked about $11.2 million of members' retirement savings channelled to the ALP. The ALP President is the chair of the CFMEU-run Cbus. The Prime Minister has conducted this personal attack but completely refuses to talk about these donations.
Order. The Prime Minister is 40 seconds in. I'll ask him to return to the question and give him the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I reject the assertion that's contained in the question. I reject the assertion completely. And a range of, once again, a slur against someone who was named, indeed, the world's greatest finance minister during the global financial crisis. The person who kept
Members
us...
on my left. Order. Member for Barker and the member O'Connor. The members on my left will cease interjecting.
That's ringing a bell.
The person who was Treasurer during the 30 years of consecutive economic growth that was created by the Hawke-Keating economic reforms and saw us through the global financial crisis is eminently qualified to chair a superannuation board that he has done in very recent times. But for those opposite to speak about accountability and transparency, the point
of the opposition
is very
will cease interjecting
simple here,
Member Morton,
which is that they ask about transparency when it comes to the ABCC. We went to not just one election, we went to 3 elections saying that we would abolish the ABCC, and I know that those opposite might find it unusual, the idea that you do what you said you would do during an election campaign, and you receive a mandate for it
member for Groom. Members on my left.
from the Australian people. But that is precisely what we will do. We will go through our election commitments and we'll tick them off one by one, because that's what governments of integrity do. But we won't take lections of integrity from the shadow treasurer. Other bodies will deal with him.
Time for the Minister's Prime Minister time has concluded. I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
It's a reflection on a member, Mr Speaker. Reflections on the integrity of the Shadow Treasurer are quite out of order.
Look, order. The member will just resume her seat. Order. I didn't hear what the Prime Minister was saying because there was too much noise on my left. If you want me to rule and hear these points of order, I need to hear what the Prime Minister is saying. I've warned the members for Groom and the members for Barker and other members are close to it. These questions will be heard in silence and there is too much noise in the chamber. I give the call to the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How will the passage of the Albanese government's climate change bill address the climate wars and deliver a better future for Australian families and businesses?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the people of Macquarie know all too well the cost of climate change. The member for Macquarie knows all too well the benefits of action on climate change, and I thank the member for her friendship and her very, very strong climate advocacy. Mr Speaker, the passage of the Albanese government's climate bill through the House today, 89 votes to 55, represents the will of the parliament and the will of the people, Mr Speaker. The Australian people voted for action on climate change, and today the Albanese government delivered action on climate change. And Mr Speaker, today represents the opportunity for the parliament to stop arguing about whether to reduce emissions and to start working together on how to reduce emissions, Mr Speaker. That's what happens today. And there has been broad support for the passage of the Albanese government's reforms through parliament in the lead-up to today and in the last few hours. We've seen the Business Council of Australia say the nation can't afford to go back to the future. We must move forward now to secure a frontier economy powered by affordable, reliable, secure and low-emissions energy, 43% is a sensible, achievable target which can be delivered alongside new industries and better jobs with coordinated action. And that's just a representative statement of the views of the business community. Unsurprising, perhaps, Mr Speaker, because from opposition we worked with the business community on our climate change policies, because we want to work in partnership with people of goodwill in this parliament and beyond the parliament to get emissions down and to get jobs up. That's our plan, Mr Speaker, to get emissions down and jobs up. The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry has said this is a missed opportunity for the opposition. The announcement today demonstrates that the climate wars are over. This must act as a moment of unity of purpose. And again, we agree with the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Some in this House think they know more about business than the Business Council and more about commerce than the Australian Chamber of Commerce, but we don't on this side of the House, and nor do members of the crossbench, because today, 89 votes to 55, the Australian Parliament spoke the will of the people. But we know the work does not end today. The work begins today. Now we have to rewire our nation. Now we have to ensure that our biggest emitters reduce their emissions through the safeguard mechanism. Now we have to develop a national electric vehicle strategy, Mr Speaker, and that's exactly what we will do. Now we will roll 400 community batteries out across our country. Now we will roll solar banks out across our country. That's what this government will do. Mr Speaker, today does not mark the end of the work. Today the work just gets started. We are just starting the work that the Australian people elected us to do.
Order. Order, members. Members on my right. Members on my right will cease interjecting. I give the call to the member for Cowper.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. What does the Minister say to the residents of South West Rocks, a small coastal community in my electorate, who will now be forced to compete with suburban Sydney to attract doctors, all because of Labor's decision to blow up the classification system for rural doctors?
I give the call. Order. I give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm pleased to take another question about the ways in which this government is seeking to make it easier to see a doctor, because the last government made cut after cut and change after change that have resulted in it being harder to see a doctor, more expensive to see a doctor than it ever has been in the Medicare era. And I'll go to the changes we made to DPA, because the member in his question tried to compare the area he represents to Sydney. Now, what we did with our changes to the DPA, the District of Priority Access, is to reverse distribution priority access, is to reverse a cut made by the former government in 2019 that removed the ability in 140 GP regions of this country to employ overseas trained doctors. And they were not regions in the middle of Sydney. They were regions like the one represented by the member for Hunter, by the member for Shortland, by the member for Patterson, on the Central Coast, in other regional areas of Queensland, of Victoria, of New South Wales, because the former government pretended it was the same process to recruit a doctor in the Hunter Valley as it was in Mossman, and it simply isn't. I visited time after time GP surgeries in regional Australia that had consulting rooms that were closed, consulting rooms without a doctor, and the leader of the National Party might scoff. I mean, they tried to run a campaign in the Hunter Valley. They obviously didn't bother visiting any GP practices in the Hunter Valley, because doctor after doctor in that community, patient after patient, said because of your changes in 2019, it had never been harder to see a doctor than it had been right now. So we make no apology for reversing those cuts. No apology at all for reversing those cuts and making it easier to see a doctor in the Hunter Valley, a community you pretended to represent and failed dismally. failed dismally.
The Leader of the Nationals is
what
warned.
those opposite might want to tell their communities is that I was
The
lobbied.
Leader of the Nationals will leave the chamber under 94A. Order. It's not something to cheer about, government members. The member for Grey on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. The minister is constantly referring to you and the leader of the.
I thank the member for Grey. The minister will direct his comments through the chair. I call the minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I apologise to you because I remember very clearly you supporting Labor's policies to make it easier to see a doctor right through the election campaign. But I can tell you, Mr Speaker, I was lobbied to reverse the changes the former government made, for example, to bulk billing incentives in DPA2 areas like the Hunter Valley, and I resisted that lobbying because I thought it is important that there be continued incentives in more rural and more regional areas, including higher bulk billing rural incentives and higher incentives under the Workplace Incentive Program.
Expired. When the House comes to order, the member for Werriwa has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How will the Albanese Labor government work to address the skills crisis it inherited and help ensure that the economy is not held back by these skills shortages?
I give the call to the minister.
I thank the member for her question and her keen interest and advocacy in tackling skill shortages in this country. Given the sheer scale of this challenge, the government has hit the ground running on this very important issue. Now, it is also true to say that we didn't just inherit a massive fiscal debt, we inherited a massive shortage when it comes to skills in the labour market. That's the reality, and for that reason we need to do everything we possibly can to address this problem, because over the last decade there's been a mismatch between investment in skills and the skills that are in demand. So there's a lot of work to be done by this government, because whether you look at the aged care sector or the disability care, you see skill shortages. Whether you look at advanced manufacturing or the tech industry, hospitality and tourism and the retail, there are skill shortages. There are skill shortages in the traditional trades and personal care services. There are even shortages amongst teachers and trainers that are needed to equip the workforce with the skills that are in demand. And for that reason, we need to get on with this very quickly. It's why, as the Treasurer said earlier in question time, we're convening the Jobs and Skills Summit, bringing together businesses, large and small, unions, training providers, state and territory governments, other experts, to drive this agenda, to make sure we work together to deal with this problem, this shortage in many sectors of the economy, a crisis that's actually being experienced in those areas. It's also why we've committed to 465,000 fee-free TAFE places. We want to put TAFE back at the centre of the vet sector in this country, finally. That is absolutely important, an important vehicle to bring about change. This government understands that for Australia to succeed, for us to maintain and improve living standards, we need to have a skilled workforce. A skilled workforce is a productive workforce. A productive workforce means a stronger economy, and it means cheaper goods and services. But as a Labor government, we also understand this. We understand that training working people means it provides them the dignity and indeed the sense of fulfilment of having a good job. Because if you train workers in areas of demand, you provide security of employment for those workers. You provide a career progression. So it's not just important for our economy, it's not just important for businesses in this country, it is critical for workers who deserve a decent go and deserve secure work.
Before I call the member for Fowler, I'd like to inform the House that we have present in the gallery this afternoon His Excellency Mr Wolfgang Strohmayer, Ambassador of Austria. On behalf of the House, I extend a warm welcome to you. And I give the call to the member for Fowler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Australia is facing a cost of living and jobs and skills emergency. My electorate of Fowler also bears the brunt of the nation's migrant settlement city. It has one of the highest national unemployment rates over the past decade, almost 10% and more than double the national average. How will the Prime Minister commit to working with me to lower the unemployment rate and lower the cost of living for struggling families of Fowler?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank very much the member for Fowler for her question. And just last week we had a very constructive one-on-one meeting about how the government can assist people in Fowler electorate around the Liverpool area in south-west Sydney, an area that I'm very familiar with. And the member is quite right to point to socio-economic disadvantage that's there in Fowler. It has a much higher proportion of new migrants to Australia than the average across the country. And in particular, many newer groups have gone to south-west Sydney to settle, to make Australia their home. Over a period of time, what I know is that communities like the Vietnamese community in Fowler, just like the one in Marrickville, when I recall the member for Fowler living in my electorate some years ago where we first met, that community has proven to be a great success. But newer communities, of course, require that additional support, such as the Assyrian community, people who fled war-torn Syria in recent times. And my government is very conscious of that. That's one of the reasons why I've encouraged the member to engage in the Jobs and Skills Summit process, to have a local forum, and offered the government support to provide advice, speakers, to provide the full force of government to have local forums, which is on offer to anyone around this chamber as well. What we need to do is to work with the local business community, to work with TAFE, the three levels of government, and I discussed with Premier Perrottet today at the National Cabinet, along with other premiers, how we can make sure, arising out of that, we give Australians more opportunities for jobs through better TAFE funding, better training, making sure that we identify those opportunities which are there. One of the things we know is that long-term unemployment can be a scourge. In particular, I'm aware that in south-west Sydney there are pockets, large pockets of housing estates whereby disadvantage is entrenched. When I asked a question the other day about social housing, I spoke about the need to have a mix of housing as well. And I have raised with state premiers as well as with local government, how we get better investment as part of this government's commitment through our Housing Australia Future Fund and other investment vehicles to get increased support for a mix of housing, so that you don't have people growing up in communities where they can't see people that they can aspire to be one day. I thank very much the member for Fowler for her question. I look forward to working constructively with her, and I thank her for her engagement with the government up to this point.
And I give the call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Leader of the House. How is the government's management of the House in its first sitting fortnight delivering on Labor's vision for a better future, and how does that compare to previous parliaments?
Order. 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 I'm very keen to hear the answer, but the manager of the opposition... Order. When the House comes to order, I'm trying to give the manager of opposition business the call. When the House is silent, I will hear from him. I call the manager of opposition business.
Mr Speaker, question time is for ministers to be asked about the activities of the current government. You've given a ruling on this. How can this question possibly be consistent with your ruling?
The question is in order, and I call the Leader of the House, who's also a minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Lyons for asking an excellent question. An excellent question. And it's fair to say I like this parliament better, significantly better. And one of the things I'll say that we've had, particularly if you look at the debate that happened this morning,
Order.
How long
Members
is it
on my left.
since it, how long is it? How long is it in this parliament since we've had a situation where the crossbench move an amendment, the minister listens to the speech, and the parliament then makes a decision based on the debate? For 9 years, the debate didn't even occur. For 9 years, the amendments weren't even allowed to be moved. And today what I saw in the parliament was a situation finally where different members of parliament, regardless of where they are in the chamber, brought forward their ideas. The debate mattered for the outcomes and the parliament voted. I note no amendments from those opposite, no amendments from those opposite at all. And as well as there being no amendments, even when they were voting no, like not even any enthusiasm, not even like they wanted to be here. But the procedures that have allowed us to be able to do this have changed what's possible in the parliament. Now, first of all, I'll pay credit. Of the 35 new members, we have had 24 first speeches now. And for members on this side, that side and the crossbench, it is good to have those first speeches so early in the new parliament. But what we have also achieved, against those opposite saying it would be the end of democracy, are new procedures which have allowed people to debate. Now, for the last 2 nights, where previously the process would have been
The manager will take a break. Order. Members on my right. Members on my right. I'm calling the member for Wannon, and I'd ask him to state the point of order.
Its relevance. How many bills have you guillotined this week? That's what we need that explained to us. Because you've been doing that.
Resume your seat. The member for Wannon, that was not a point of order. That was a member for Wannon. That was not a point of order. It was a question that is not within the standing orders. And if those kind of disruptions continue, action will be taken. The Leader of the House has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The point of order might have been out of order, but it was really helpful because I was about to refer in terms of the new procedures, with the speaking times being dropped from 15 minutes to 10 minutes. The member for Flynn said it was an absolute appalling use of the guillotine that he wasn't allowed to talk for 15 minutes. He then sat down after 8 minutes and 4 seconds with nothing more to say. The last 2 nights, member after member has stood up and opened their speech by saying it is outrageous that we are being silenced, and they have continued to talk for 10 minutes about being silenced. And then they said the 10 p.m. cut-off is the same as a gag, that cutting it off at 10 p.m. means that we just don't get to speak at all. It's exactly the same as what they used to do, moving that the Speaker be no further heard. Well, the first time we used that procedure of the 10 p.m. cut-off, they ran out of speakers at 9:37. Last night, they ran out at 9:27. The parliament's being used as it should be.
The Leader's House has expired. Order. The House will come to order. Members on my left, I'd like to hear the member for Fadden's question, and I give him the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, reports in the AFR show a total of $85.5 million in payments by 51 super funds to political parties, namely the Labor Party, and associates, namely unions, over the past 5 years. Can the Prime Minister confirm the very first act by his Treasury under his government was to water down transparency and accountability measures designed to give Australian super fund members visibility of how their savings are spent?
Order. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The first act of the government was actually to sit around as a cabinet and to agree
Order. The member for Fadden has asked a question.
To put in a submission to the Fair Work Commission to give low-wage workers a pay rise. That was the first act that we did, because what we said was that $20.33, people were doing it tough. People were doing it tough. So that was the first act of the government. we've continued to implement our priorities. We will continue to implement our priorities. We were transparent before the election. And just as those opposite are transparent, that they've never seen a union they didn't want to undermine, and they've never seen an industry super fund that they didn't want to have a Royal Commission into,
Prime Minister
or that they didn't want to take action
the Prime
against.
Minister will take a short break. I call the Deputy Leader on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question actually said the first active treasurer. The Prime Minister is not addressing the question. The question said the first act of Treasury.
The Deputy Leader will resume her.
Okay.
The Deputy Order. Members on my left. The Deputy Leader has raised a point of order. The question. Order. I'm trying to rule on the point of order. The Deputy Leader asked a point of order. The question is about the first act, and I'm calling the Prime Minister, who is in order.
And I know it might come as a shock to some of those opposite that Treasury has something to do with wages and with submissions to the Fair Work Commission, and that Treasury, including the very good Secretary of the Treasury, Stephen Kennedy, someone who served the previous government and someone who continues to serve this government, a fine public servant, knows that what we did was to put in that as our first act. That was our first act. Those opposite keep repeating the same acts over and over again, which is to stand here and just give working Australians a reminder that they've never seen a union they didn't want to undermine, and that they've never seen industry super funds that they didn't want to get rid of and undermine and weaken. And that is why, when they came to office, they had a Royal Commission into superannuation, and what that found, indeed, was that industry super funds performed much better than the retail funds. And the industry super funds, which those opposite have played with over and over again, the increases that were there for the super guarantee up to 12%, they've undermined consistently the whole way through. We on this side support the right of workers to have superannuation. We're pretty proud of it. We're pretty proud that it is part of Labor's legacy.
The Prime Minister will just resume for a moment. I'm calling the member for Fadden.
Mr Speaker, standing order on tedious repetition, standing order 75. All we've heard is the Prime Minister tediously repeat his support for the union movement as opposed to answer the question on the first act of his Treasury.
Order. That is not... the Prime Minister is in order. That is not a point of order, and I give him the call. He has concluded his answer. I give the call... The Minister for Climate Change. I give the call. The member for Reid can resume her seat for a moment. She will get the call. Just giving the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
This is answer. The Prime Minister made a dismissive gesture towards the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. It was disrespectful to a senior woman parliamentarian, and I ask him to withdraw that.
Order. I was listening closely to the Prime Minister. I didn't see anything in his answer that was disrespectful at all. Resume your seat. If the Prime Minister... Order! If the Prime Minister had done something disrespectful, I would ask him to withdraw it. But there was nothing said, and we will move on now with question time. Order! Members on my left, I give the call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Prime Minister. What work is the Albanese government doing to improve the lives of Australians and put our country on a path to a better future after a wasted decade?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Reid for her question and for her contribution already to the Labor government. We have hit the ground running. This is a government that promised not to waste a day, and we're certainly doing that. Our government has had a real impact on people's lives, whether it be the minimum wage increase, whether it be dealing with floods, whether it be delivering antivirals and 4 shots around the country. Our plans are building the foundations of a better future. 43% reduction in our emissions, which is about creating economic opportunity. Jobs and skills, the Jobs and Skills Australia legislation, which is up. The Jobs and Skills Summit, where we'll get business, unions and civil society together to talk about how we advance. Aged care, where we've already passed legislation, where we've stood up for the workers that we see today in the gallery who need a pay increase. Rebuilding relationships around the world, making us stronger at home, but making us stand on our own 2 feet and be secure in the world. It's not just what we do, it's how we do it. And how you do it is bringing people together by being more inclusive, something that those opposite never sought to do. We're always looking for division, we look for unity. We look for that sense of purpose and our common interests, whether it be working with business, unions and civil society on climate change, finding strength in our common purpose. Good government changed my life, and good government helps people put a roof over their head. Good government supports young people who want to learn a trade or get a degree. A good government ensures older Australians can live out their later years with dignity and respect. A good government creates opportunities for families to get ahead. A good government gets wages rising. A good government boosts productivity. A good government makes it possible for Australia to make things here again. And a good government uplifts the whole nation by advancing the interests of that nation, by recognising that our history didn't begin in 1788 and recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our national birth certificate, our constitution. Together on economic policy, on social policy, on environmental policy, we will build a better future. We will form alliances and work with all people of goodwill, and that is what we have seen when the parliament passed our climate legislation this morning.
Has concluded. Order.